Greetings, everyone. Aloha, and welcome to the Center for Chinese Studies webinar series at UH Manoa. My name is Winston Wang. I'm a moderator and organizer of this series, and I teach Minqing China in the History Department. Today's presentation and dialogue is the fourth CCS webinar this semester. It's also the 12th event in the academic year. By organizing those events, we hope to foster more balanced, more systematic understanding of China, its past, present, and future from a variety of disciplinary and thematic perspectives. Our topic today is the Daoist ritual tradition and practices. As we all know, China's religious cultures are extremely rich, diverse, and complicated. As one of the three great teachings of China, Daoism in particular has played a critical role in the development of popular religious worship at the grassroots levels. We are very glad to have Dr. David Mozilla with us today. He is the author of a new, exciting, important book on the living Daoist ritual tradition and practices in nowadays central Hunan province. He will be talking about his new book while dialoguing with Dr. Jonathan Petit and Dr. Edward Davis. We are delighted to have the three experts from different disciplinary backgrounds joining us, helping us make sense of this important topic. Before introducing our three speakers, on behalf of the CCS, I would like to thank you all for your participation and for your support. A special mahalo to our guest of honor, Dr. Mozilla, who is joining us from US mainland. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce the hardworking team of CCS staff members led by current director Dr. Min Baoyu, associate director Dr. Cindy Ning, and program coordinator Ms. Jianing Sun. During this session, if you have any questions about technical or logistical issues, please use the chat forum that will be monitored and answered by Dr. Lin and Ms. Sun. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Department of Religion and Department of History at UH Manoa. We would like to thank and acknowledge our co-sponsors for their support. Please know that this presentation is being recorded and will be uploaded to the CCS YouTube channel, where you can also find the recordings of some of our previous events. We're also on Instagram and Facebook. Follow us to get the latest news and updates. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the three great speakers today. The first speaker is Dr. David Mozilla. He was a lecturer at the Department of Religion at UH Manoa. It's great to have you back, David, with us, even in a virtual form. He studies living Daoist and Buddhist ritual traditions in Hunan province in South China and the roots of those traditions in the liturgical vibrancy of the Songyuan and early Ming dynasties and in the religious tradition of late imperial China. His monograph, Launching the Banner, Ritual and Relationship in Daoist Practice, was published in 2021 by the University of Hawai'i Press and the Chinese University of Hong Kong Press. Dr. Mozilla is the author of several articles, including Oath and Curses in Divine Empyrean Practice, published in the Journal of Chinese Religions, and another article, Living Redactions, the Salvationist Roots of Daoist Practice in Central Hunan, published in the journal Daoism, Religion, History, and Society. The second speaker is Jonathan Petit. Dr. Petit is Associate Professor of Chinese Religions at UH Manoa. His research focuses on the production and dissemination of Daoist texts, both in the medieval era and in contemporary groups such as Yiguan Dao. He also was the Associate Director of the Center on Religion and the Global East, where he co-wrote and edited publications Mapping Spiritual Capital in Contemporary China. Our third speaker is Dr. Edward Davis. He is Associate Professor of Chinese History at UH Maloa, focusing on the middle period of Tang-Song dynasties. He is the author of the book Society and the Supernatural in Song China and the editor of the Encyclopedia of Contemporary Chinese Culture. Dr. Davis is working on a book project entitled Popular Religion and Imperial Sovereignty in Tang-Song China. In terms of format, Dr. Mozilla will first speak for about 45 minutes. Then Dr. Petit and Dr. Davis will join the conversation for about 15 minutes. Then we'll open up to our audience for Q&A. At any time during the presentation and discussion, we invite the audience to use the Q&A forum instead of the chat function to send comments and questions, which we will monitor and present to our speakers after their presentation. Please do not wait to send your questions until the very end, because then we might run out of time to answer them. We'll try to take the question in the order they have been submitted, but sometimes we have to synthesize or group them together due to the limitation of time. After today's presentation, we'll send out a brief survey to our audience, and we would greatly appreciate if you could take a minute or two to give us some feedback. So, without further ado, let me turn over to Dr. Mozilla first.
Thank you very much, Professor Wang. I really appreciate it. I'd like to thank the University of Hawaii Center for Chinese Studies, the Department of Religion, Department of History for sponsoring this event. It's really a privilege to be able to talk about my work with Jonathan Petit and Ned Davis, two scholars I really admire. Thanks also to the whole team here at the Center for Chinese Studies for making this happen. During this disconcerting time of geopolitical shifting, it behooves us to reflect on the crucial role that forests such as this play in understanding our complicated world. It's easy to regard the humanities as inconsequential or naive amid the larger forces reshaping our world these days. But conversations, even those like ours today, are in fact political acts. In aggregate and over time, they too contribute to the political reshaping of the world. With that view, we should all be grateful for the Center for Chinese Studies and the conversations it affords. Before I begin, I would like to thank my friend and collaborator, photographer Doug Cantor, for permission to use his images for this talk and for the book. It will be obvious which photographs are his and which are mine. Most of my remarks today are based on Chapter 3 of my recent monograph, published by UH Press, as Dr. Wang mentioned. And UH Press also, by the way, published Ned and Jonathan's important books. For the new Daoist Studies series in which Jonathan, Zhang Chaoran, and I published, UH Press partnered with the Chinese University of Hong Kong Press. Okay, so I'd like to begin with a story. A while back, I was attending a large Daoist Thanksgiving liturgy called the Xie En Jiao in Anhua County in north-central Hunan province. Patrons from dozens of hamlets nestled in the eastern edge of the Daxiong Mountains had gathered in a local temple, which had been in a state of rebuilding since the early 1990s. They gathered to give thanks for continued blessings by the sagely emperor of the southern March Mount, Nanyue Shengdi, a high god popular in Hunan. On the last day of the 4-day program, the lead officiant among the Daoist masters presiding over the event performed the rite to reward services, Shanggong, rendered by a host of thunder gods. Fierce martial deities, clad in military dress and brandishing frightening weapons, thunder gods, Leishan, embody the primordial power of thunder. Thunder and lightning bring life-giving rain, but also supply the power by which meddlesome demons are exorcised or even destroyed. When summoned by talismans produced by officiants during Daoist rites, thunder gods and their spirit armies wield the power of thunder and lightning for some ritual purpose. They might safeguard households from economic calamity or social discord. They might protect bodies from illness and misfortune, and they might heal a household or person already afflicted. Over the course of the 4 days of the Thanksgiving Jiao, these thunder gods had heeded the officiant's ritual summons to descend from their celestial bureau to guard the altar space from demonic attack. They had also protected the messenger spirits who delivered written memorials and petitions from the masters to various high gods in their heavenly palaces. The Shanggong rite on the last day of the Jiao was designed to thank the thunder gods for those services. Near the end of the rite, the lead officiant here performed a ritual by which he charged or consecrated hundreds of talismans, which were then distributed to the attending patrons. Each talisman called on the host of thunder gods to do one more service: guard the household of each patron, Zhanjai. After the Jiao, each patron would take a talisman home and paste it on the threshold of his or her house. A talisman would serve as a conspicuous sign to any lurking demonic forces that fierce thunder gods and their spirit soldiers had been summoned and were deployed about the household. I'm sorry, I think we're off. There's the pasting of the talismans on the threshold. Okay. Prior to the rite, the lead officiant and several masters had spent hours inscribing the talismans designed to summon and employ the thunder gods. I was struck by how unguarded they were as they worked. A few who were not members of the lineage were looking over their shoulders, quickly copying the talismanic script as it was inscribed in front of them. I learned later that these copyists would often try to sell them for profit after the Jiao, to my mind creating local competition for the Daoist masters' ritual services. When I asked the masters about this, they were not concerned. They explained dryly that a talisman is inefficacious, literally, without numinous qi, mei-ling qi. If the inscriber does not first learn the visualizations allowing him to transform his body into the divine and then stir what they called primordial or ancestral qi. Without mastery of this ritual knowledge, which is closely guarded by members of the lineage, talismans are simply useless strips of yellow paper with strange writing on them. I begin my inquiry with these Daoist masters' nonchalance. I learned that masters of this lineage have been dominating religious life in that particular pocket of Hunan since at least the early 19th century. Their social status has allowed them to trust residents not to pay for ritual services from those outside the local lineage, including from those who peddle apotropaic or therapeutic talismans. Residents go to ritual specialists they know. It seems the lineage's 200 or so years of service has engendered confidence and loyalty from locals. But that is not what the master said to me when replying to my question. They nonchalantly gave me a liturgical answer. Talismans are useless pieces of paper, cloth, wood, stone, or bone with ineffectual writing on them unless the inscriber knows the visualization practices that make those inscribed objects efficacious. This talk asks what exactly are those visualization practices that make these kinds of talismans work? What makes the strange script able to do what it purports to do? Summon thunder gods to protect and sometimes heal spaces and bodies. Answering this question requires a journey deep inside the ritual by which a talisman is produced. By examining moments in a living talisman-producing ritual, we shall see that a talisman's power to signify in the divine realm, to communicate with deities, to summon and employ them, begins with the talisman's own ontological status. An efficacious talisman is not simply made of ink and paper or blood and cloth or some other media. An efficacious talisman is instead made of primordial qi, which an officiant, by means of complicated internal visualizations, recovers from his own body and then infuses into the talisman, transforming the media of the talisman into material expressions of primordial power. It is that ontological weightiness of the body of the talisman, so to speak, that allows the talisman to be efficacious, that allows its peculiar language to be heard by deities, and that opens the possibility that they might respond. My talk will unfold in 3 parts in a conclusion. Part 1. The living talisman-producing ritual we shall look at today, which is also the ritual to which my entire book is devoted, It's called the banner rite to summon Sire Injiao, the Ingong Fanfa. The banner rite, as it is generically called, is the most detailed and comprehensive rite by which to summon thunder gods. The officiant of the rite must produce a long talisman written on a 3 by 8 foot banner with 5 pennant-like streamers cut into the unattached end of the cloth, and then hoist it onto a tall pole. The talisman is a formal summons of the thunder god Injiao. If he heeds it, he will descend from his celestial palace and use the wind to knot the banner to signal his presence and willingness to be commanded by the officiant to do exorcistic work. The full banner rite is absolutely crucial for an ordination jiao. An ordinand, that is, an apprentice seeking acceptance by the gods into the ranks of the priesthood, must successfully perform the banner rite on the first day of his own ordination. This performance is the first time he officiates over a ritual in public. If he happens to be unsuccessful and the thunder god fails to descend from his celestial palace and use the wind to knot the summoning banner, the rest of the ordination would likely be aborted. After all, who would hire a master who demonstrably cannot summon the divine supplier of his exorcistic power? You can imagine the pressure on the ordinand. Daoist masters in this particular pocket of Hunan tend to recognize Celestial Lord Injiao and or Wang Lingguan as the thunder gods with whom their lineages have special relationships. A whole host of 36 thunder generals and their multitudinous spirit armies march under their banners, and so follow them when they are summoned by a master. A full rendition of the banner rite, performed on the first day of any Daoist jiao, including, as I mentioned, ordinations, always produces a talisman on a cloth banner and requires 1 hour and 20 minutes to perform. Truncated versions of the banner rite produce shorter talismans, usually on paper, such as the yellow ones to be distributed to patrons of the Thanksgiving jiao we just saw. Today we'll examine parts of a banner rite performed by an aspiring member of a lineage during his own ordination. Chen Diwen was born in October 1976, nearly a month after Mao Zedong died, in a tiny hillside hamlet in Anhua County in north-central Hunan province. He was a sickly child, and his pious grandmother steadfastly prayed to local deities to heal and protect him. When Chen was coming of age in the 1990s, his corner of Hunan was finally feeling the economic effects of Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up policies, instituted in late 1978. But Chen's poor health made it difficult for him to maintain steady employment. He was one of the few locals who resisted the lure of higher wages and rigorous factories on the coast. Instead, he stayed home and worked as a concrete mixer and bricklayer. The local building trades were booming as returning migrant laborers competed to display their newfound wealth by installing shiny white tile facades on their country homes. But Chen's health remained an issue. The constant dust from working with concrete gave him chest pains, so he left the trade. His poor health also made unattractive work as a commercial farmer or in a local factory, let alone on the coast as a migrant laborer. Increasingly desperate and depressed, Chen found himself most interested in the Daoist masters who performed jiao liturgies and funerals for lay patrons in his local community. I had not done well in high school, my health was not good, and I didn't want to learn a strenuous trade, Chen remembers. I was living a relatively difficult life with a body that just couldn't take it. But I liked the ritual music, so I began to study Taoism. Chen was drawn to the courtly bamboo flute music local masters played as they performed their rituals. He thought working as a Taoist priest might also benefit his shaky health. Chen spent 4 years apprenticing under the watchful eyes of the dozen ordained masters in the local lineage. Like all apprentices, Chen absorbed the rhythms of the rites performed during jiao ceremonies for the living and funerals for the dead by learning on the job. During rituals, I would play a little flute, read a few texts, and then listen to my masters sing, Chen says. I slowly studied and imitated them. At first, I could only understand a little. There was a lot of places in the text I had to ask a master to explain. If you live to be an old man, you'd study until you're an old man. There's no way you can understand all of it. You can only get better a little at a time. Chen was studying to enter a lineage of strictly male masters who, like countless masters across China, marry, live in homes rather than in temples, and often hold secular jobs in addition to minding their liturgical responsibilities. Chen's lineage actually considers itself half Buddhist, half Daoist, Banfo, Ban Dao. Ritual masters perform funerary rites for the dead, which they regard as Buddhist, and therapeutic rituals for the living, which they classify as Daoist. Daoist manuals preserved by the lineage claim that their Daoist traditions originated in a temple, the Jade Void Palace, built in the mid-14th century in Xinhua County, just to the south of Chengdiwen's Anhua County. Zhengyi Daoist traditions made their way north, and by the mid-17th century were practiced by Chen's liturgical ancestors in the Great Bear Mountains in north-central Hunan. The lineage's Buddhist manuals record that the lineage's Buddhist traditions are rooted in exorcistic Buddhist traditions associated with the 12th century monk Pu'an, who lived and practiced in northwest Jiangxi province, not far from Chen's region in Hunan. A Chan monk in the Linji tradition, Pu'an was known for mastering Daoist exorcistic rites. And today, Buddhist exorcistic traditions associated with him flourish throughout South China. Clues from the liturgical manuals preserved by Chen's lineage suggest that his liturgical ancestors had been simultaneously practiced Zhengyi Daoist and Pu'an Buddhist rituals since at least the latter half of the 18th century. By the late 18th or early 19th century, this dual Daoist-Buddhist ritual tradition made its way to Chen's locale in Anhua County. Chen's lineage recognizes the celestial lord Yinjiao, also known as Thunder General Yinjiao or Prime Marshal Yinjiao, as the primary agent of their exorcistic power, and the general under whose flag all the other Thunder Generals and their spirit armies march. Chen's lineage maintains a remarkably detailed hagiography. According to it, Yinjiao has had 10 lifetimes, and into each he was born a crown prince. In his 10th lifetime, he was born as the crown prince of the infamous King Zhou, Zhou Wang, the last ruler of the ancient Shang dynasty. The hagiography gives its own twist to the oft-told tale of King Zhou. Yinjiao's mother is miraculously impregnated by the god of the star perpetuity, also known as the Emperor of the North, Petit. After she was dismissed for questioning the king's political decision council of his favorite concubine, Sudaji. Infuriated that Yinjiao was not his child, King Zhou kills his mother and leaves the boy to perish in the wilderness. Miraculously, wild animals tend to him, and eventually he's rescued by a general who raises the boy. When Yinjiao comes of age, he plans to avenge his mother by raising an army to destroy the cruel king and his regime. While searching for skilled military men, Yin comes across an adept who had been praying for a worthy to whom he could transmit his techniques of self-realization. With some effort, the adept convinces Yinjiao that patricide is against the will of heaven. He takes in the mercurial boy and trains him in the arts of the Tao. The Emperor of the North notices Yinjiao's devotion and bestows upon him a halberd, golden bell title, and a secret incantation by which he would be summoned. This remarkably detailed hagiography, maintained by an ordinary lineage of masters, conveys crucial bits of information about the deity who would play a central role in Chengdiwen's performance of the banner rite. Most important for our discussion today, the text repeatedly ties Yinjiao to the Emperor of the North. Yin's mother was impregnated by the high god, and he later confers to the young man the trappings of his power. None of this key information about Yinjiao was invented by Chengdiwen's lineage. My book shows that much of the hagiography of Yinjiao maintained by Chen's lineage is rooted in a hagiography from the late Yuan or early Ming, that is, the mid to late 14th century. That text in turn draws on images of Yinjiao expressed in older ritual manuals that were circulating among particular Taoist lineages during the Song and Yuan periods, that is, the 10th through 14th centuries. During that time, exorcistic methods for summoning and employing a host of martial deities, including Yinjiao, flourished across ritual traditions. The great medieval Taoist traditions, Celestial Master, Shangqing, Lingbao, and cults of the Emperor of the Northern Emperor were along with Chan and Tantric or esoteric Buddhist traditions, appropriated and developed by new Daoist traditions emerging during the Song dynasty. The correct rites of the heart of heaven, Jianqing Jiangfa, divine Empyrean, Shan Xiao traditions, and pure tenuity traditions, Qingwei, to name a few. These new ritual traditions, on which Ned here has done influential work, all summoned and employed fierce martial deities, of which Yin Jiao is just one. Intellectually aggressive masters of these traditions also articulated and debated many of the ritual theories that have somehow, through the vicissitudes of local practice, found their ways into today's banner rite in Hunan. Like strands in the thick fabric of the banner rite, Middle period ritual theories are woven into its subtle action, into the terse language of the ritual manuals that script it, and into the interpretations of the masters who perform it. Therefore, discourses from centuries ago become valuable tools to help us recognize and unpack the Chinese ritual theories animating talisman-producing rituals such as the banner rite. Part 2. The heart of Chen Diwen's performance of the banner rite consists of the production of a talisman on the blue banner. Before he can actually inscribe the talisman designed to compel Yin Jiao to comply with his summons, Chen must charge the talismanic writing with primordial power. The efficacy of the talismanic script is inextricably bound up with the status of Chen's own body. Via the power of visualization, Chen must transform his mundane body into the divine body of a deity, and then recover his true self from the primordial void. It is that true self, endowed by the Tao at Chen's birth and teeming with the Tao's transformative power, that constitutes the root of talismanic power. Let's take a look at what this ritual sequence looks like. Notice the monotonous percussive rhythm of the gong and cymbal that accompanies the ritual action. There is none of the courtly flute music that initially attracted Chen to the lineage. The droning helps the officiant sustain a high level of concentration. As Chen works through the sequence with the lineage's ritual manual open on the altar table in front of him, one of his witnessing masters looks on to ensure that he doesn't commit any major gaffes. The support of the masters extends even to the organ's actual performance of the banner rite in real time. Via the power of visualization, Chen first envelops his body in a protective cone of golden radiance. Then with hand mudras, he hacks his body into 3 large pieces and imagines them as bundles of withered wood and dry hay. With internally generated fire, he incinerates his desiccated body. As Chen rolls his eyes into his head, he visualizes images according to the instructions given in the banner rite manual on the altar table in front of him. Draw fire to incinerate the body, the text reads. From bottom to top, flames from the entire body rise and rise. Dense smoke billows and billows. Suddenly the flames burn out and only one puff of azure smoke remains. Slowly, slowly it rises upward and congeals into the celestial master, the old patriarch. Out of the smoke of Chun's consumed body emerges the 2nd century patriarch of the Daoist Zhengyi tradition with which Chun's lineage identifies, Zhang Daoling. Following the same page in the manual, Chun visualizes the precise appearance of the first celestial master. His head dons the crown of upper clarity. His body is clad in a vermilion robe bordered by a fiery dragon. And in a Daoist robe with feather trimmings and cloud shoes, that is, shoes curled like clouds at their tips. 2 sideburns of beard and hair hang down, and he has the appearance of one who holds the tablet in an audience with heaven. His body descends and is my body. In startling detail, Chun visualizes Zhang Daoling emerge from the conflagration of his own body and then descend downward again to take the place of his original mundane body. To ordinary eyes, Chun has, within the safety of the halo of golden radiance enveloping him, destroyed his mundane form and replaced it with the body of a notable deity. This divine body is composed of qi, far more resonant with the ultra-rarefied ancestral qi generated by the Tao at the origin of the cosmos. Chun has just moved one step closer to recovering the Tao from within himself. That Chun Diwen takes on the specific body of Zhang Daoling is significant. Paul Anderson, retired from the religion department at UH, points out that in Song-era Heart of Heaven text, the deity impersonated by the officiant is very often the first patriarch of the lineage's ritual tradition, or the deity who is thought to have transmitted those rituals to the world. Heart of Heaven practices are peppered with instructions for taking on the body of Zhang Daoling, who Heart of Heaven masters claimed originally transmitted their liturgical tradition. One of many examples appears in a text called Secret Essentials of the Most High for Assembling the Realized Ones for Assisting the Country and Saving His People. This text was composed by Master Yuan Miaozong and submitted to the throne of Emperor Song Huizong in 1116. According to that text, the practitioner is to visualize that one's own body becomes the commissioner of the Department of Exorcism of the Northern Extremity, whose left hand holds the official seal of the great ritual methods of all the heavens, and whose right hand brandishes the fire-bell sword of Samadhi. The commissioner appears in the regalia of the realized one of the orthodox unity of the 3 heavens, with a crown of interpenetrating tranquility, a fish-finned robe, and red boots with black toes. The commissioner of the Department of Exorcism of the Northern Extremity is a Heart of Heaven title for Zhang Daoling. As the patriarch of the Heart of Heaven tradition in which much of Chun Diwen's own lineage is rooted, it makes liturgical sense that when transforming one's body into a divine body, one begins by taking on the body of Zhang Daoling. Chun Diwen, cum Zhang Daoling, proceeds to transform his already deified body into the body of an even more ethereal deity, the Dark Emperor Xuan Di, also known as Zhengwu, the true warrior. By means of a complicated inner alchemical sequence, Chun visualizes that he conceives, gestates, and then gives birth to a tiny Zhengwu, who is exteriorized through the divine middle eye in Chun's forehead. The Dark Emperor floats up and stands on wisps of incense smoke emanating from the altar table, and then descends onto Chun's body, sheathing it like a bamboo envelope. The masters of Chun Diwen's lineage call this entire sequence of intense visualization transforming the body, Bianshan, or transforming into the divine, Bianshan. But Chun, as the rarefied divine body of Zhengwu, does not stop there. He continues on to recover the true primordial self. He follows instructions to visualize that 10,000 rays of golden radiance descend from the heavens, shine upon the body, and fill up the entire room. Clack the teeth 3 or 6, or perhaps 9 or 18 or 36 times, while the god of moats and walls and local god of the soil line up on either side. Visualize the true person of primordial destiny within the formless. Only after a short while does it seem the true person of primordial destiny consents to come out from the formless. Clothed in divine radiance, it emits from the ordinance two eyes and disperses to fill up the empty void. Golden radiance from the gate of heaven connects with the earth door, and thunderous radiance surges upward. The three radiances of heaven, earth, and thunder merge into one. My body stands in the middle as the Lord of transformations who summons the 10,000 gods. They descend from the heavens and gush up from the earth. They all have great bodies that brace the heavens above and the earth below, and their powerful radiance dazzles. They stand respectfully with hands clasped, listening for my command, and then they are dispatched according to that command. The passage is striking. As a divine body, Chandi Wen recovers his true person of primordial destiny. Variously called the true person of primordial destiny, primordial spirit, primordial chronogram, the true self is the deepest, most intimate self that was primordially destined or assigned, which means it was bequeathed by the Tao at the moment of birth. But the true self normally remains hidden in the formless void of the cosmic primordium. Chun actively calls forth or recovers from the formless void the secluded self naturally in accord with the Tao. That true self is then emitted from his body and manifests in the world as dazzling radiance, filling up the space between heaven and earth. By the way, for penetrating philosophical meditation on this true person of primordial destiny, I urge everyone to check out Paul Anderson's recent book. He puts this Taoist concept in conversation with modern Western existentialist philosophy to interrogate the true self's nature as, paradoxically, existing and in existence, as Yo and Wu, as both localized subject and impersonal truth. A patient reading of the book gives a sense of the deep philosophical claims made by Taoist rituals about how the true self is bound up in the primordial Tao. Back to our story. The theme of recovering a true primordial self according with the Tao draws deeply on practices theorized by intellectually aggressive masters in the Song Yuan and into the early Ming. For example, Zhao Yizhen, a major codifier of the pure tenuity tradition, is said to have taught that everything at root possesses primordial qi from the Tao. To identify that primordial qi in oneself is to experience oneself as one and the same as the cosmic power of the Tao. In the pivot of the methods of the Tao, the Qingwei tradition, someone asked the great master, "What is the way of transforming into the divine?" The master replied, "During the original kalpa of primordial commencement, unified qi divided into reality. I am primordial commencement. Primordial commencement is me. This is what is called transforming into the divine." For this great pure tenuity master, there is no division between the practitioner's true self, Wo, and the latent power of unified qi prior to its division into the variegated world of phenomena. To transform into the divine means to recover within oneself the ontological wholeness of primordial unity. Theories such as this, from some 7 to 8 centuries ago, are baked into Chandi Wen's practice and into his lineage's manuals for scripting them. The final goal of the transformation of the body is not to transmute the mundane body of an efficient into that of a powerful deity such as Zhang Daoling or the Dark Emperor Zhenwu, in which guise the efficient does ritual work. Instead, those moments in the transformation of the body are necessary steps in a larger process by which the efficient reveals and reconnects with his own primordial spirit, his primordial self, the true I, always and already within him and according with the cosmic reality of the Tao. Chan then visualizes that he musters a retinue of celestial martial deities to protect his true self as it journeys to the lofty Shangqing heaven. Surrounded by his great entourage, Chan's true self has an audience with the Emperor of the North, who is, recall, Yin Jiao's celestial superior. Chun requests from the Emperor of the North an imperial edict commanding Yin Jiao to comply with Chun's summons in the banner rite. Part 3. Chun Diwen became divine. After transforming his body into various deities, he recovered his primordial self, recouping the cosmogonic power latent within himself. As a true self, he stood in audience in front of Yin Jiao's superior, the Emperor of the North, and requested an imperial edict that Yin Jiao obey the summons. Now Chun was ready to actually summon Yin Jiao. The technology by which Chun would do so involves inscribing on the dark blue banner a long talisman comprising hundreds of written graphs, some in legible Chinese script and many others illegible to all but the gods. The process of drawing the inscription would require more than half an hour and was far more complicated than simply writing out a series of graphs on a large piece of cloth. Chun explains, "While inscribing the talisman, I got rid of all distracting thoughts and sincerely drew each and every talismanic graph. As I inscribed each graph, I visualized a certain something and incanted a certain something. I didn't go off and pay attention to something else, and I did not doubt myself, since I had already practiced the banner rite for 49 days and really knew it." Chun notes that talismanic writing here involves more than simple inscription. Talismanic writing is necessarily accompanied by verbal incantation and concentrated visualization. Here's what it looks like. Chun first draws the circular frame of the first graph and then inscribes one strong calligraphic stroke within it while he simultaneously incants. One point within the sphere of radiance and the marshal appears. As he inscribes and incants, Chun visualizes a spark flicker in the still void of the primordial. This graph, that Chun's lineage calls the ancestral chi of the primordial chaos, denotes the primordial chaos itself, a void within which a single point of radiance emerges, ready to spark transformations that would eventually lead to Yin Jiao's compliance with the summons. We see circle-like graphs like this at the head of talismans strewn about Song and Yuan sources. However, we get precious little theorization about them. In the pivot of the methods of the Tao of the Qingwei tradition, Master Zhao Yizhen instructs and writes, these days when inscribing a talisman, one must first draw the image of a circle. This is the image of creative transformation that can then be seen. In another text, the mysterious discourses of the thunderclap, Zhang Shanyuan, a second-generation disciple of famed divine Empyrean master Mo Yueding, taught practitioners, and I'm paraphrasing here, to visualize one point of bright light in the anterior heaven, that is, the still void of the primordium. That bright light is emitted through the eyes in the form of radiant light that forms a circle. This circle, Zhang explains, is the great Tao, the primordial chi of the anterior heaven. When located in the body, it is one's primordial self. In the banner right, this first graph signals that the entire talisman to follow is itself an expression of the pristine chi flowing from the stillness of the primordium, which was tapped by Chun when he recovered his primordial self. The efficacy of the talismanic script is inextricably bound up with the ontological state of Chun's body. His divine self exudes the pure, undifferentiated ancestral chi breathed by the Tao to form the nascent cosmos at the primordium, and breathed by the Tao to form Chun's true self at his conception. Chun channels that potent chi into the very talisman itself. The breathy incantations, concentrated visualizations accompanying each inscribed graph produce a kind of synesthesia between writing, speech, and mental image. All are intermingling expressions of ancestral chi flowing from Chun's primordial self. The entire talisman is charged with primordial power, certain to penetrate the celestial sphere and hopefully garner a response. Next, Chun inscribes 4 characters that read, "The Emperor of the North decrees." These words identify the entire talisman as the edict from the Emperor of the North acquired by Chun when his divine self ascended to the god's celestial court. As Chun inscribes the graphs, he follows along the ritual manual on the altar table he memorized to incant. The Emperor of the North himself raises celestial troops. He musters the myriad spirits. The great Emperor has a decree that today I implement. Marshal Yin Jiao, quickly comply. The talisman plays on the hierarchical relationship between Yin Jiao and the Emperor of the North. Recall from the lineage's hagiography that Yin was born by the miraculous impregnation of his mother by the Emperor. Later, the High God conferred to Yin Jiao his weapons, title, and secret incantation. As he inscribes and incants, Chun visualizes that he is making a bold declaration to Yin Jiao that Chun ascended to the heavenly court and secured proper authority to summon the martial deity. The declaration aims to compel Yin Jiao to recognize his administrative duty to his celestial superior. The talisman, then, is not simply made of ink and cloth. Instead, it is composed of pure ancestral chi flowing from inscription, incantation, and imagination. When properly produced, the talisman carries immense ontological weight. It is that weight that allows the talisman to signify or make meaning in the world. A logic of identity is implied here. The ancestral chi out of which the talisman is made resonates with the rarefied chi of the celestial realm and its denizens. It is this material basis that allows the talismanic language to penetrate Tong, the celestial realm, to communicate with deities. Semiotic terms, the talisman is an iconic sign. It shares in the reality to which it refers, which is the reality of rarefied ancestral chi. In this sense, efficacy is produced, or better, tapped, by ritual rather than intrinsic to the written form of a talisman itself. This is why masters in Chun's lineage were not terribly concerned when charlatans were glancing over their shoulders and copying the written forms of their talismans. Any forms inscribed, even with extreme precision and in good faith, are powerless without the ritual process of recovering the divine self. Chun and his masters knew that, and they were confident that their enterprising neighbors, who were not members of the lineage and so not privy to those closely guarded secrets, did not know that. Conclusion. I want to articulate something about a couple of the methodological and theoretical moves this talk and the monograph behind it are performing. First, this research is a kind of methodological experiment in how to integrate ethnography and text historical analysis. Instead of focusing on ethnographic data about living people and then scouring textual sources for the historical context of their group or condition, this book focuses intensely on the phenomenon of a single performance of a single ritual by particular people. The book does this by contextualizing that ritual performance in the interpretations and thus the lived concerns of its main ritual participants. The book also historically contextualizes the ritual performance in big liturgical ideas that were debated during the incredible religious vibrancy of the Song and Yuan periods. Almost a millennium ago, sophisticated Daoist theorists trying to figure out how their rituals work or fail to work debated the idea that ritual efficacy is rooted in visualization practices that tap the vivifying power of primordial qi breathed by the Tao at the cosmogony. The book tries to show that several of those intellectual currents are baked into the interpretations of today's Daoist practitioners, baked into their liturgical manuals, and most important, baked into the performed ritual itself. A ritual such as the banner rite, performed in a particular way by particular practitioners in a particular locale, exudes regional particularity, and yet is impregnated with grander theories about the nature of ritual practice. Amid all the regional innovations for which local religion in South China is renowned, recognizable theories and practices from China's middle period have made their way, twisting and turning into lived religious life today. Mine is a classic approach in the phenomenology of religion, a somewhat unfashionable style of scholarship in the study of Chinese religion. In its close reading of the banner rite, the book tries to get inside it. It tries to account for what the ritual means in its own terms. From the point of view of the banner rite, what matters is the ontological status of a liturgical device such as a talisman, which is bound up with the ontological status of the practitioner. This book does not aim toward a history of the major liturgical theories and practices that inform Taoist practice today in places such as Hunan. There are far too many lacunae in our known sources to undertake such a study. Instead, the book flips the dynamic. It asks how several liturgical theories from the middle period help make sense of the ritual as performed today. In this book, history is the handmaiden of liturgy. Second, when we take this sort of phenomenological approach, we're prodded to think about the nature of the efficacy of talismans. We must recognize that the use of talismans have been ubiquitous in Taoist practice and that there have been many kinds of talismans. Several scholars working on the ancient and medieval periods have pointed out that talismans were believed to be efficacious because they have an intrinsic power that allows influence over the things they named or portrayed, such as people, gods, places, and even nature itself. For example, Ge Hong and practitioners of the emerging Shangqing and Lingbao traditions thought that strange talismanic writing was a facsimile of illegible celestial patterns that arose spontaneously at the cosmogony. Those patterns composed of rarefied qi were directly generated from the primordial creative process and so were intrinsically imbued with that creative power. The efficacy of a talisman depended on how precisely one copied that primordial form in inscription. What was important about a talisman was not whether it was legible, but how well it captured the original form of the celestial pattern. Efficacy inheres in graphic form. But the banner rite and its masters account for efficacy differently. The efficaciousness of a talisman has less to do with the intrinsic power of the graphs themselves and more to do with the precise way they are produced. A talisman is not powerful primarily because it faithfully mimics a celestial template. Instead, its power derives from the ritual processes by which a practitioner attempts to harness powerful ancestral qi via visualization, channel it through his body, and then express it as an amalgam of writing, incantation, and visualization. Talismanic writing in itself is not efficacious, but imbued with the materiality of ritually tapped ancestral qi, talismans become a synesthetic mode of communication, able to resonate in the divine realm. Thank you very much.